what a pleasure this is for me, and what an amazing privilege as well. I'm thoroughly excited and thoroughly, I can't say, I don't even know what to say, but I'm looking at all of you who come to support me and listen to what I have to say. So thank you for being here. So, and to ask me to talk about Sálim Ali and talk about birds, what else could be the best for me? So the interesting thing about Sálim Ali is that he was in such a specialized, narrow field of zoology, which is ornithology, but yet he became so famous, and that is what is really curious and interesting about this great scientist. That he was already famous at quite a young age, and even what is nice to know is that even future generations know his name. But there are so many older scientists whose names the younger generation don't even know. So I think it's because what, as Indra said, that is because his book, and that is what really made him famous. So Sálim Ali was known as the birdman of India. He was known as the father of ornithology. He was known as India's greatest ornithologist and all that. And he chronicled, what he actually did was he chronicled the birds, almost every species that is found in our country. And that was his amazing achievement. And the Book of Indian Birds actually made him famous. And he wrote this way back in 1941, and it became a bestseller. That's always amazing. How did a book on birds become a bestseller? And it did. And it went on to 12, 13 editions, and it made him really famous. And that is the beginning of his fame. And Jawaharlal Nehru, Tara Gandhi, all the greats of that time, they read the book as well. And during his lifetime itself, he was a legend, a popular figure, and books were written about him during his lifetime and also after his lifetime, of course. And a stamp came out on him, and even a comic book. There's even a comic book about Sálim Ali, which is really rather nice one. It's come out. They have been quite true to his life, and so that for children can understand what Sálim Ali is all about. And of course, there was another book called Sálim Ali for schools. And during his lifetime, there was a radio interview, so like a spoken autobiography. So this here was a radio interview that somebody did, and it goes on to several sequences, and that is really quite interesting. So that shows how kind of well known he was. Then apart from the Book of Indian Birds, he wrote so many others. He was a prolific writer. He wrote a number of books like Birds of Kerala, Birds of Sikkim, Common Birds of India, and Hill Birds of the Western Ghats, and also of the northeastern states he wrote. And the magnum opus was this 10-volume handbook of Indian birds, which he wrote along with his American colleague, Dylan Ripley. I don't know why it's called a handbook. It should be called a shoulder book or a backpack book, because it's 10 huge volumes. And it describes 1,200 at least species in India, which Dr. Salim Ali and Dylan Ripley wrote, and it's in extreme detail. It's amazing detail, right from the measurements of the bill and feathers and the toes, and right up to their breeding, of course their ecology, their food, their nest. Everything is there in that book. And even though a lot of books have now come out on birds of India, this still continues to be a major reference book for serious birders. So then he wrote a number of scholarly and scientific papers as well, and he actually loved to communicate. So he wrote a number of easy to read articles, for lay people, so anybody can understand what he's trying to convey. But what is less known over the years is that he also gave a series of radio talks and radio broadcasts, which over 40 years, from 1941 right up to 1985, and he died in 1987. So you can imagine at the age of 91. So at the age of 89, he was still giving these radio talks because He just wanted to share. And we have to remember that radio was a very powerful tool those days in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. There was no internet, there was no social media, so he used this very powerful tool to convey messages about conservation. And he spoke about such a wide range of topics, which we will come to in a bit, and about how important birds are, apart from their beauty, apart from what we love to listen to them and watch them, what they do, how important they are in nature. So I'm just quoting him here to say that the object of these talks is really to interest listeners in the first instance for the healthy pleasure and satisfaction bird watching affords, rather than for its intrinsic scientific possibilities. So apart from the science part, he wanted to just promote the idea of birds and their conservation. So as I said, radio was a very powerful media in those days, so he used that. And all these, I was fortunate to be able to find a list of his radio talks that he had himself listed. And he was so particular about all that. He used to make all his own lists. He says which station it was recorded, which station it was meant for, the date, the time, and all were timed to be exactly 14 minutes. He would time them to be 14 minutes so that they didn't overshoot anything. So that's what is being compiled into this book. And one of them was so interesting, he had even children's broadcasts. So, and children who didn't understand English. So he spoke to them in Hindustani. And that was really so wonderful about him. So what is his background? Who was he? What kind of background did he come from? And he became so famous finally. So he came from this wonderful, closely knit and large family, Mumbai-based family. And they were very supportive of one another. They were distinguished people in governance and in business. And they were a very integrated kind of family. And you can see little Salim Ali sitting out here. And as a young boy, he was bad at studies. He hated maths. But he was interested in birds. He was interested in birds, and he says, quoting him, he says, "I had dreamed of taking up zoology, particularly ornithology, as a profession when I grew up, and become an intrepid explorer and a hunter." That's what he wanted to be, big game hunter, not just ordinary hunter, but big game hunter he wanted to be. So, those days hunting was fashionable. It was much before the Wildlife Protection Act came into India, and he belonged to his family, and they were also, many of them were not shikar, and that was a done thing those days. So one of his uncles, when he was just a little boy, told him was an air gun. And so his interest in birds was also to shoot them. So he would walk about in his garden. They had a big exploring garden, and he'd shoot little birds. And so he says out here that on one of my rare occasions, so actually during his talks, I'm sort of digressing a bit here and there, but in his talks he answers the question that many people ask me, how did I get interested in birds in the beginning? How did I get interested in birds? So now he's giving me the answer here. So he says, on one of my rare occasions of successful murder, I noticed that the victim, which was intended to be a common house sparrow, bore a curious yellow patch on the throat. So you can see this little yellow patch here. You can see it there, that little yellow patch, tiny yellow patch. And so it aroused his curiosity. And so what his elders said, why don't you take it to the Bombay Natural History Society, which was run by the British those days, and with amateur naturalists who were quite, they were amateur, they were quite well versed in ornithology, and they were quite knowledgeable. So he went there and to the Bombay Natural History Society, and the gentleman there identified it and said, yes, indeed, it's not a common sparrow, but it is a yellow-throated sparrow. Of course, the name has changed now. It's now called chestnut-shouldered petronia. It's a different name, but it was called the yellow-throated sparrow, a very logical name in those days. And so he says, like ripples from a pebble dropped in water, the circles of my interest in ornithology widened. said that was a very beautiful quote of Salim Ali's, how he, how suddenly his interest just blossomed like that. So, but again, he was not good in studies, and he was not doing very well, as in the family, all highly advanced people. And so his family actually, they despaired. They didn't know what to do with this young man because he was just scraping through his studies. And so they sent him off to Burma, where they had mines and they had his businesses. They tried to put him into different businesses of the families. And he didn't really do very well. And he was married, and they were also concerned that, how's he going to look after his wife. But she, Termina, was a remarkable age. She was brought up in the UK, and she had a very sophisticated background and a very affluent family. And so he also worried, how is this girl going to live my kind of life, which is all rough and tough and out in the wild. But she proved to be a great, wonderful companion to him, and she went with him everywhere. She shared his interests, which was really marvelous for Salim Ali to have a wife like that. So again, he was like 30 years old and jobless, but his family was so supportive. They took care of him, took care of the couple. They gave him accommodation, and they were very supportive as a family. He worked for a while in a museum and as a lecturer, and he found it very dull, very repetitive. He didn't like it, and he felt this great desire to learn more, to learn ornithology seriously, properly. His childhood dream of learning ornithology, and in India there was no such possibility of learning ornithology. There was no such subject in India. It's actually Salim Ali who brought in the subject in later in his life, but there was no such subject. He couldn't study it at all. And so he calls it the Cinderella of biological sciences. He said that ornithology was called the Cinderella. Nobody wanted it. So he went off to Germany, and he went there for 2 years or 3 years, and he studied. That's where his academic training really began. He got really detailed study of methodologies, how to study birds, and he learned about birds' interaction with nature, which is what he really wanted. He wanted to know how do birds live their lives. He wanted to know more about their lives, not just about their measurements and that kind of thing. So that's where his training began, the live bird in its natural surroundings, how it lives, how it migrates, and all that. So again, he returned to India, and again he's jobless. So what does one do? So he applied to the BNHS, Bombay Natural Resources Society, for grants, and then because he was now trained, they gave him some grants, and he undertook major explorations of the whole country. Including and the royal families also supported him, including Mysore and all the royal families, they supported him wherever they went to their state, and they gave him logistic support to study and document the birds in their area. So they spent months. He spent months moving from camp to camp, living very simple life. In this kind of small little. You can see he's living actually in a little tram car, and his wife Termina. You can see her here. She's such a delightfully game person to be able to do that with her husband. They moved around and they lived in these kind of tents. And he says of Termina that she accompanied him, and she in fact tried to even make those little tents look habitable and decorate them with little flowers and things like that. And not only that, she also, because her English was so good, she even helped him to he says, polish up my language. So when he wrote a record or wrote a document about the birds, she would actually, make it sound a little bit better. That's what he says himself of his wife. So throughout his life, Salim Ali actually just traveled and he covered the whole country. He went from the Rann of Kutch, which is extreme west, right through to central India, to the east, to Chilika Lake, the biggest brackish water lake in India, one of the biggest ones. And all this, why I'm talking about his life is because all these radio talks reflect that. He talks about all the adventures that he had. He talks about the people whom he met and what he saw over there. And for instance, he talks about he's going on this camelback, and he says that there was so much salt. It was a salt marsh. He said he used to crunch underfoot. And it was the most uncomfortable journey he'd ever done in his whole life, sitting on the camel. This is him sitting over there. I don't know if you can see that little man up there is Salim Ali sitting on the camel. And he went by boat. He's landing in some little island to study the shorebirds. And he even went on elephant back in the Western Ghats. And finally on foot. He went up to the 16,000 plus feet pass over the Himalayas, and he went to Manasarovar because he wanted to see over there. He says, quoting him, he says, to study the natural condition under which birds live on the roof of the world. He went into Tibet to ascertain at first hand what species breed there. So, those days, nowadays, to go to Manasarovar is much easier. You can fly from Nepal and you can go much easier. But those days, you had to go on foot and took a 1 month long trek up to the mountains and cross this huge pass and get down to 15,000 feet above sea level to Manasarovar Lake. And he stayed there, he camped there, and he looked to see what birds species were breeding out there. So actually, this is about India, and in India we have these amazing landscapes, there are ecosystems. We have here the cold desert, which is Ladakh, and then we have the hot desert in Rajasthan. We have mangroves, we have the seashore. It's pretty amazing the landscapes that we have in India, and each of these landscapes has its own assemblage of birds. A shorebird can never survive up in the dry desert. So we know that each of these landscapes have their own assemblage of birds, and he went to all of them and he studied them and wrote about them. And in fact, it said Salim Ali that no inch of the country was left untrod by him, which is just a remark that actually one of his nieces made about him. So, in between all this, independence came, and there's a major change, a major transition, and so the Great Bombay Naturalist Society was kind of more like a sporty club. They were naturalists, they were very knowledgeable, but it was also like a club, they would sit together, they were shikars, and all that, and it transferred into Indian hands. And Salim Ali became the head. He worked at other levels first, and he became the head of the organization. And he transformed it into a premier institution for scientific study of birds. And it changed. It became, and also a lot of wildlife acts also came in after that. So it was more for academic study and for proper recording of birds, and even now it is a high level institution in India. So he recruited staff and students, and of course I was one of the students whom he recruited, so I was very pleased about that. And and you can see, and I'm really so fortunate that I was a student of Salim Ali's and of the BNHS. And so you can see the BNHS were constant thread through his life. From the time the 10-year-old boy, when he goes with this little bird to identify it, to his dying day when he died as head of the Bombay Naturalist Society. So, and in between also the BNHS supported him on his explorations. So that has been his background the whole time. And of course, he went on to receive a number of awards. He was a Padma Vibhushan, and he got a number of other awards as well. And he nominated the Rajya Sabha, which was the end of his life. So, but despite all that, whatever he had, whatever he became, he was just an outdoors man. What he wanted to be was always out in the outdoors. In fact, he says that he never drank a sip, but he would say the air is champagne. He would say things like that, which is for him that was his high. He got his high from that. And he would also make fun of himself. So he said that when I go around, in nature with his binoculars and I'm peering into bushes and looking at the ground, looking at the sky, people think, I'm a scruffy looking character wearing khaki colored clothes. And so people look at me with great suspicion. And so he said they generally think I'm crazy. That I'm quite, so he makes fun of himself, this great man. And he also says that professions who all just those days used to just think, they used to look down. They said, oh, just a hobby, bird watching is a hobby, only rich people can do it, there are no jobs in this profession, there are no profession that you can do. So he said that it was generally looked down upon as this scruffy little chap who's going around with binoculars. So he makes fun of himself like that. It's quite extraordinary. But all these radio talks that we're coming down to the book finally of the radio talks that he gave, all the notes that he made and the records that he made during his entire lifetime, from all the places that he'd gone to, those became the matter, the masala of his articles, his books, and his radio talks, radio broadcasts that he did. And he would type them out himself by hand, and he would correct them by hand. He would type them out in old-fashioned typewriter, no PCs those days, and he would correct them all with this. He had beautiful handwriting, very legible, very neat, very clear. He would write everything. For me, it was a delight to see that. I had the chance to actually see some of those documents, and so for me, it was like I was in heaven and I didn't know that. So, but he would do that, and he would go out in the field during the day. But every day he would sit and write down the notes, and he would tell all of us also that don't rely on your memory; it is completely unreliable. Don't even, don't think, okay, I'll write about it later. He would insist with your students and staff that you write it down immediately, so that you don't, forget. So we did that. So about the radio talks, what does he talk about? He talks about the resident birds that he saw in all those places that he went to, and the birds that actually lived there and breathed there. He talked about all that, and these are some of the beautiful birds that you can see. And he was fascinated by the Bayard beaver birds, and he did some really detailed studies about this. This is a particularly, freakish nest, I would say, that you have never seen such a long Bayard beaver bird's nest. And he found this after somewhere, but he would sit on a machan and watch these birds their entire cycle, how they wove the nest and how they courted each other and how they laid their eggs and all that. He did that. And apart from that, he would also talk a lot about the Bayard in between them. It comes several times during lectures. But he also talks about all other types of birds and types of nests that they make. And for children, to make it interesting, he says that, he says this bird like a tailor, that bird's like a weaver, this bird like a mason, because it digs up the soil and makes its nest. So then he would make it really interesting for children. And then he talks about the seasons, what happens in monsoon, what happens in summer, what happens in winter. So he talks about the pied cuckoo, which is supposed to be the harbinger of monsoon. If you see a pied cuckoo, the monsoon is going to follow very soon. So, and then of course it never builds its own nest. It always lays its egg in another bird's nest, in a babbler's nest, and the poor babbler brings up the chicks, thinking it's his own. And so that's the pied cuckoo. But he says, there's so much one can learn from these talks. When he's living in Bombay, Mumbai now, he says that we could hear the pied cuckoo all the time, and when we listen to it, it's a loud sound, and we hear it. It would sometimes crash into our houses. But now that doesn't happen anymore. So one can learn from his talks that there's a huge change, ecological change happening in India and that all over the world, of course. Like in India, you can know that you can't hear the pied cuckoo so beautifully now as you could hear it during his time. Then he talks about the marvel and the wonder of bird migration. And he actually says, look at the Arctic Terns migration from the North Pole to the South Pole and back every year. It does this phenomenal journey. And how does it do it? How does it store that energy? How does it traverse, huge tracts of ocean? And how does it, how does it know where to go? How does it navigate? Is it the stars? Is it magnetism? What is it? So he said maybe right now there may be, further research, perhaps my Berlin friends will be tell me there may be greater research now that has unraveled some of these mysteries. But according during his times, he says, I don't think humans can unravel this mystery and how these birds know how to do this extraordinary migration that they do. And in the Bombay Naturalistic Society, he used the techniques that he learned in Germany to how to put a bird banding. He started with bird banding and satellite studies and all that. And they now he found out all the different routes that the birds take. So they come to India here to Bangalore, and they come to the south to Point Calumet. And look from where they come. They come from Siberia, they come from Mongolia, they come from the Arctic Circle. And how they do those journeys, it is really, it is still a marvel, and it's still a mystery which I think as Salim Ali says, it's going to take a long time for us to unravel that mystery. And he has that sense of wonder. He says he talks always great wonder and great emotion and great sort of joy about all that. And this bar-headed goose was another bird that he wanted to know where does it breed. And that's why he went to Manas Rover. He went across the Himalaya into the Tibetan plateau, and he found the bird was nesting over there. And he wanted to know which are the other birds that nest there as well. And he found that they nest in these pristine, cool lakes during the summer when the lakes have thawed. And in winter, they come over the Himalaya. How do they do that? They come over the Himalaya into the plains, and they spend the winter in warmer climates. So all that they track the routes that they take, and that was fascinating study that they've done, which he got done. Another big favorite of Salim Ali's was birds in the agricultural landscape, because he really wanted people to understand that birds have a role to play. They're doing something that's really important for us. For us humans, they're very important for nature, for ecology. And he talks about how important birds are for farmers. So he says, so that is it, that he, throughout his lectures, here and there, he definitely talks about the birds and what they do for nature. And so these are very, birds that we are all so familiar with all over the place. The Indian roller and black drongo, which we see everywhere, but he's still there. So now if he takes me this one species, this is just the white-throated kingfisher, you can see the number of insects that it consumes. Now the white-throated kingfisher is not really a king, it doesn't really eat much fish, but it is much more of an insect eater. And among all these, so many which are really harmful to crops, growing crops that the farmer has taken so much trouble to grow. And they have to sometimes, use so many pesticides because they are being attacked by that. So he says that these birds actually have a role to play, and they are actually controlling. They cannot eliminate them, but if you have a number of insect-eating birds like this white-throated kingfisher, you can probably bring down the number of insects that are attacking your crops. So he talks about all that. And the absolute favorite of his is the birds of prey, the owls. And he talks vehemently about all the superstitions that are against owls. And he says that please understand that they do such a big service to us. They are eating rats, they're eating mice that are bad for the cities, they are bad for agriculture. He says that a pair of rats can produce, he gives some phenomenal figures, I can't remember, in a year. And just one owl, if it eats 2 rats in a night, can you imagine the amount of service it's doing, free service it's doing to the world. So he says, please look after your birds of prey. And he talks about the water birds. And he says that their guano, which falls into the lakes, into the water bodies, it actually fertilizes the water. So the farmers living around are benefited because they can draw that natural fertilized water and reduce the amount of chemical fertilizer they have to put otherwise on their plants to grow. So he talks about all these great contributions that birds do, and that is why they have to be protected and conserved. And so he brought about a new subject called economic ornithology, and through him actually this is now a subject that is being taught in agriculture universities, economic ornithology, which tells you the role of pollinators, like the sunbird is an amazing pollinator, and without pollination we know that plants find difficult to survive. And the insectivorous birds, the seed dispersers that eat the fruit and disperse the seeds, and of course the water birds. And how he says that this control of crop pests and this dispersal of seeds and the fertilization of water is a huge contribution to agriculture and to forestry and to the Indian economy. He takes it back to that. Next slide. Yeah. So, but he doesn't hesitate to talk about birds that are destructive. He's not so like, birds are all great and that everything is, we should. He was never sentimental and never, trying to be only promotional. But he said he wanted to say it as it is. He said that there are a lot of birds that are very destructive to agriculture, very destructive to. Just look at the number of parakeets that are just, settled on those bags of grain. And you can imagine they're just pecking away, and they can consume such a lot. So he said they are, and of course he suggests ways to control them, but never eliminate. And he said that nothing should be eliminated, but the numbers can be controlled. And he suggests ways of controlling them. So, and of course, some birds have become overabundant in the cities, which is terrible. They are actually, crows and pigeons, they're actually crowding out the smaller birds that are more sensitive, and they are the ones that can eat anything. I mean, not the pigeons so much, but the crows can eat anything and they can survive and they can crowd out the more sensitive birds. So he talks about all that. Then he goes on to talk about birds that were extinct, and the 2 or 3 species that he's really very, very sad about that have gone extinct. And he made so much attempt, especially this Himalayan mountain quail. Even in his 80s, there was a battle found somewhere. They found a place where it used to be 80 years ago, 90 years ago when he was alive. And so he went there and he searched for it, and he said, let's go to the exact spot where it was last found. And he searched and didn't find it. So at last he had to, declare it extinct, too much to his great sorrow. And of course, this pink-headed duck also is extinct. Then, using the extinct birds as an example, he says, now we should protect the birds that are vulnerable. These species that are on the brink, you have to now do something about them. So he talks about the great Indian bustard, which has got, which is suffering from a number of, reasons of its habitat going wrong and numbers coming down. And then there's also this white-winged duck, which needs very special habitat. It needs a particular kind of a marsh. It needs it needs a particular kind of ecosystem to survive. It can't survive elsewhere. So he said, let's do something about these. Let's make sure that we conserve them in some way or the other. He talks about all that. So even now, these 2 species are still vulnerable. They're still highly threatened. But what's also interesting is that he talks about nature in general. Of course, he's a birdman, ornithologist, and all that. But he talks about nature in India, and he talks about man and nature in India, which is also interesting. Man, of course, includes women in this, but he talks about humans and nature in India, and he talks about wildlife. And he talks about, the wildlife of Kashmir, the wildlife of Sikkim, and, all the beautiful animals that you can see. But we have to also remember that there was a time when shikars allowed, and they were actually encouraging foreign tourists to come and come for shikar. So some of the radio talks, I think he was asked by All India Radio to speak about the possible shikar animals. And he does talk about them. He says, it's very exciting and it's a thrill to hunt markhor in Himalaya and all that. And he talks about the beautiful, the hungul. But very soon, as soon as he found that the numbers were declining and that the wildlife was getting squeezed out of its habitats, and that and he used to hunt birds as well. So he talked vehemently about what he calls gargantuan shoots. The people used to go to Bangalore, and all these migrant birds came. They would just shoot thousands of them indiscriminately. So he talks about all that, and he says he's extremely, he talks about it in a very, very critical way. And then as soon as he realized that these populations were coming down, rhino, elephant, and hangul and all coming down, he immediately changed his attitude, and he completely abided by the rules of the great wildlife conservation. And so he said, what's the reason? What's the reason for these birds and animals becoming rare, becoming extinct, becoming so vulnerable? What's happened? So he says, because of inappropriate land use. What we've done is we've decimated our land. We have done so much to destroy our landscapes. We have, all these mines in the wrong places, and deforestation and pollution of the soil by pesticide use. But according to him, the most serious is our population. This is our huge population is what is, and the demands of this population is what is affecting our wildlife. He talks about all that. Excuse me. So this is his analysis of what is happening. So Salim Ali had this vision. He really felt that humans, we are also part of wildlife. We are also, we are biological entities. We are not above all that. So he's emphasized the connection between nature and humans and human well-being, not only economic, but physical and spiritual. He believed that nature has all these qualities that we have to understand better. And you can read what he says over there. Excuse me. That what is now required is the understanding that human thought is an integral part of nature conservation. And we must take a total view of life on earth. We have to take and we cannot consider that man is separate from all other forms of life. So this was his vision that he really wanted to promote. So now this man who can speak with such vehemence and such, he would be quite cutting sometimes about what he saw, and he'd be critical about, people who are doing the wrong things that are affecting nature badly. He would laugh at himself. He could also suddenly burst into lyrical language, which is quite amazing. He was he was a master of language, and he would look what he sort of says about bird song. He says that the fluty chord of the black-headed oriole, the mellow sibilant whistle of the iora. So this being a gathering of the International Music and Art Society, I thought we should listen a bit to the birds that Dr. Salim Ali talked about, and let me see if I can get the sound there. Is it coming, do you think? I'm hoping to come. Oh, yeah, there we are. So this is the black-headed oriole. And this is the magpie robin. So this was Salim Ali and his words for birds, which his vision was that we people and nature are all one, and that we should ensure a safe future for birds and for us. Thank you.